The Galactic Central Assembly Chamber buzzed with 1,000 different voices. Representatives from 400 species filled the massive circular hall, their forms ranging from towering crystalline beings to small floating orbs of light. At the center podium stood Ambassador Sarah Chen. Her dark suit, a stark contrast to the colorful alien delegates around her. Her hands trembled as she held the datapad. Behind her, holographic images showed the devastation on New Terra. Burned cities. Melted infrastructure. Empty streets where 2.3 million humans had lived just 3 weeks ago. The evidence is clear, Sarah said, her voice echoing through the translation systems. The crater patterns match Valorian plasma torpedoes. The attack vectors trace back to 3 Valorian warships. We have their engine signatures. We have communications intercepts. This was not an accident. A Valorian representative, a tall reptilian creature named Lord Dexerone, rose from his seat. His scales gleamed under the assembly lights, deep purple and gold. When he spoke, his voice was smooth and confident. Ambassador Chen brings us tragedy and attempts to create conspiracy, he said. Our investigation shows clearly that human experimental reactors caused this disaster. Humanity plays with dangerous technology they do not understand. Now they seek to blame others for their own failures. Murmurs spread through the chamber. Sarah felt her jaw clench. She had expected this, but it still made her blood boil. Then explain the weapon signatures, she pressed. Explain why your ships were in that system. Training exercises, Dexerone replied without hesitation. Logged and approved. Your colonies expand into dangerous regions. We patrol to maintain order. If reactor radiation matches our weapon signatures, this is unfortunate coincidence, nothing more. The head of the Assembly Council? An ancient being called the Eternal Speaker raised 3 of its tentacles. The council will vote on whether to pursue formal investigation. Sarah watched as the vote was cast. The results appeared on screens throughout the chamber. Her heart sank. 712 votes against investigation. Only 308 in favor. The matter is closed, the Eternal Speaker announced. The Assembly recognizes this as tragic accident. No further action required. Sarah stood frozen at the podium. Around her, delegates were already moving on to other business. The death of 2.3 million humans dismissed in less than an hour. She had known the Valorians controlled many votes through trade agreements and military contracts. But seeing it happen so blatantly made her feel sick. She gathered her materials with shaking hands. As she walked back to her seat, she passed the Valorian section. Lord Dexerone watched her with cold, satisfied eyes. One of his aides was smiling. They thought they had one. They thought this was over. Sarah reached her station and opened her secure communication, channel to Earth. Her fingers moved across the holographic keyboard as she typed her report. The vote results. The evidence they had ignored. The complete failure of galactic justice. As she worked, something caught her attention. A small alert on her secondary screen. Unusual ship movements detected at the edge of assembly space. She frowned and pulled up the sensor data. Her eyes widened. 27 ships had just appeared on long-range scanners. No transponder signals. No identification codes. They were moving fast, directly toward the assembly station. Unidentified vessels approaching from Sector 7, a voice announced over the station's intercom. All ships are ordered to identify themselves immediately. The mysterious ships did not respond. They just kept coming. Sarah's communication console lit up with an incoming message from Earth Command. She opened it quickly, expecting orders or information about the approaching ships. Instead, she found a single line. We did not authorize any fleet movements to your location. Her stomach dropped. If Earth hadn't sent those ships, then who had? Throughout the assembly chamber, delegates were receiving similar alerts. Conversations stopped. All eyes turned to the massive view screens that showed the space around the station. The ships were closer now. Close enough for better sensor readings. They were human vessels, but modified. Weapon systems that shouldn't exist on civilian ships. Hull reinforcements. Electronic warfare equipment. This is Assembly Station Command, the intercom blared. Unknown human vessels. You are in restricted space. Identify yourselves or be fired upon. Still no response from the approaching fleet? Lord Dexerone stood, his voice carrying across the now silent chamber. It seems humanity reveals its true nature. First they create disasters, then they blame others. Now they bring weapons to the assembly itself. I move for immediate. He never finished his sentence. Every light in the assembly chamber went dark. Emergency systems kicked in a moment later, bathing everything in red light. Alarms began to wail throughout the massive station. Hull breach in sections 12 through 19, the emergency system announced. Hull breach in sections 34 through 40. Hull breach in sections. The list kept growing. Impossible. The station's shields should have prevented any boarding action. Its defense systems were the most advanced in the galaxy. But Sarah could see on her console what was happening. The approaching ships had released hundreds of small boarding craft. They were hitting the station from every direction at once, using some kind of technology that slipped through the shields. It's like they weren't even there. Through the chamber's windows. She could see small explosions as airlocks were breached. Cutting torches carved through reinforced hull plating. Boarding tubes attached to the station's exterior. Security forces to all breach points, the intercom ordered. Prepare to repel boarders. This is not a drill, around Sarah. Delegates were panicking. Some tried to run for the exits. Others called for their security details. The Valorian section was shouting demands and threats. But Sarah just watched the screens, her heart pounding. She recognized some of those modified ships. They had been registered to civilian companies near New Terra. Transport vessels. Mining ships. Personal yachts. Someone had armed them. Someone had trained their crews for military action. Someone had decided that the Assembly's justice wasn't enough. On her console, another message arrived. This one had no sender identification. Just 5 words that made her blood run cold. Now they will listen. Finally, the lights flickered again. Through the chamber doors, Sarah could hear the first sounds of weapons fire. Someone was storming the Galactic Central Assembly, and whoever they were coming fast. End of Part 1 #. The Galactic watched in horror as humans stormed the Galactic Central Assembly ## Part 2. The breach. The security forces of the Galactic Assembly were the finest warriors from 200 different species. They had trained for every possible threat. Pirate raids, terrorist attacks, political assassinations. They wore advanced armor and carried weapons that could cut through steel like paper. None of it mattered. Commander Zilmoth, head of station security, watched his tactical display with growing horror. Every single breach point showed the same pattern. His forces would take defensive positions, ready to repel the boarders. Then the humans would arrive, and everything would fall apart. Section 12 has fallen, one of his officers reported. They used some kind of gas that passed right through our air filters. Our troops are unconscious, but alive, Section 19 reports. Acoustic weapons, another officer called out. Sound frequencies that disrupt our communication implants and cause disorientation. They're pushing through. Section 34, the officer paused, checking her readings again. Sir, they're using biological agents specifically designed for each species. Our Kethron defenders are experiencing sudden muscle weakness. The Valorian troops report vision problems. It's like they knew exactly what would work on each of us. Zilmoth, S4 eyes narrowed. These weren't random raiders. This was planned, studied, prepared. Seal the blast doors to the main chamber, he ordered. Triple guard on all entrances. They will not reach the delegates. But even as he gave the order, he knew it was probably useless. In the assembly chamber, chaos reigned. Delegates shouted in hundreds of languages. Some demanded evacuation. Others called for military response. A few of the warrior species wanted to fight the invaders directly. Ambassador Sarah Chen stayed at her station. Watching the security feeds on her console, what she saw made her feel cold inside. The human boarding parties moved through the station like water flowing downhill. When they encountered resistance, they didn't charge forward with brute force. Instead, they used tactics Sarah had never seen in galactic warfare at one checkpoint. They released small drones that projected holographic copies of themselves. The security forces wasted ammunition shooting at illusions, while the real humans flanked them from ventilation shafts. At another position, they simply waited. They played sounds of approaching forces from multiple directions, making the defenders nervous and scattered. When the defenders split up to cover all approaches, the humans struck from above. Dropping from ceiling panels, they were everywhere and nowhere. It's unpredictable, chaotic, but Sarah noticed something important. Despite the overwhelming assault, despite having every advantage, the humans weren't killing anyone. Knockout gas, sonic disruptors, tranquilizer darts. They disabled and moved on. This wasn't a massacre. It was something else entirely. Lord Lexeron noticed it too. They show weakness, he hissed to his aides. They lack the courage to truly fight. When our reinforcements arrive, an explosion cut him off. Not close, but loud enough to rattle the chamber. On the view screens, they could see one of the station's defense turrets sparking and going dark. How did they disable our weapons? Someone shouted. Sarah checked her console and found the answer. The humans hadn't disabled them from outside. They had already been inside the station's systems for hours, maybe days. They had mapped every defense, every security protocol, every weapon placement. By the time their ships arrived, they had already won. More explosions echoed through the station. Sarah pulled up a station-wide map. The human forces were moving like the arms of a spiral, each group pushing forward along planned routes. They were herding the security forces, driving them away from certain sections, driving everyone toward the main chamber. They're pushing everyone here, Sarah said quietly. They want us all in one place. As if to confirm her words, the chamber doors suddenly slid open. Delegates near the exits stumbled backward. Through the doorway came a group of beings Sarah had never expected to see. They weren't soldiers. Not professional ones, anyway. They were civilians. Humans in mismatched armor and carrying a mixture of military and civilian weapons. Some wore patches from mining companies. Others had transport ship insignias. A few wore clothes that had clearly been modified from everyday wear, but their eyes held something that made even the warrior species step back. Grief, rage, determination. Leading them was a woman with short dark hair and a scar running down the left side of her face. She wore combat armor that had been repaired many times. In her hand, she carried a rifle that looked like it had been assembled from 3 different weapons. She walked to the center of the chamber with calm, measured steps. Behind her, more humans entered from other doors. Hundreds of them, surrounding the entire assembly. The scarred woman stopped at the podium where Sarah had stood just an hour before. She looked around the chamber slowly, making eye contact with delegates from every species. When she spoke, her voice was quiet, but the translation systems carried it to every corner of the room. "My name is Captain Maria Rodriguez," she said. 3 weeks ago I had a family, a husband, 2 children, 12 years old and 8 years old. We lived on New Terra in a city called Harmony Bay." She paused, and Sarah could see her jaw tighten. 3 weeks ago, Valorian warships destroyed my home. My family burned while I was off-world on a transport run. By the time I got back, there was nothing left but ash and radiation. Lord Nexerone started to speak, but Maria's rifle moved to point in his direction. Not quite aimed at him, but close enough to be a warning. He fell silent. "I came here expecting justice," Maria continued. "I came here with evidence. Video recordings, weapon signatures, testimony from survivors. I came here believing that the Galactic Assembly stood for something." She pulled out a data pad and held it up. On the view screens, the vote results from earlier appeared. 712 against investigation. Instead, I watched you bury the truth. I watched you protect murderers because they have money and power. I watched you decide that 2.3 million human lives don't matter. She lowered the data pad and looked around the chamber again. So I decided to make them matter. I found others like me. Survivors. Families of the dead. People who had nothing left to lose. We took every credit we had, every resource we could gather. We bought ships. We modified them. We studied your station's defenses for months. Maria smiled, but it wasn't a happy expression. It was cold and hard. You rely on protocols, standard procedures, predictable tactics. You've been the strongest power in the galaxy for so long that you forgot what it means to fight someone who has nothing left to lose. She gestured to the humans around her. We are the families of New Terra. We are the voices you tried to silence, and we have a simple demand. The chamber was completely silent now. 10,000 delegates from 400 species, all watching this one scarred human woman. You will hold a real trial, Maria said. Broadcast across every galactic network. You will present the evidence. You will let each side speak. And you will let the galaxy decide if justice means anything anymore. And if we refuse? Lord Thexerone asked, his voice full of contempt. Maria's smile grew colder. Then we release everything. Every corrupt communication in your systems, every bribed vote, every covered-up crime, every secret you've been hiding. We've been in your networks for 3 days. We have it all. She tapped her datapad. Screens around the chamber lit up with images. Financial transfers. Secret messages. Deals made in dark corners. We can destroy the Assembly's credibility forever, Maria said. Or you can give us what we asked for in the first place. Justice your choice. For a long moment, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Then alarms began to wail again. But these were different alarms. External threat warnings. On the view screens, new ships appeared. Large warships bearing Valorian military colors. Dozens of them surrounding the station. A voice boomed through the communication systems. This is Valorian Defense Fleet. We are here to rescue the Assembly from terrorists. Stand down immediately or be destroyed. Maria didn't even look worried. She just smiled again and tapped her datapad once more. Right on schedule, she said quietly. Sarah Chen realized with sudden clarity that everything was going exactly as the humans had planned. Even the Valorian response. This wasn't just a raid. It was a trap. And the galaxy was watching. End of Part 2, #. The Galactic watched in horror as humans stormed the Galactic Central Assembly, #. Part 3. The trial of truth of Valorian warships hung in space like predators surrounding wounded prey. Their weapons were charged, targeting systems locked onto the assembly station. Inside the main chamber, Maria Rodriguez stood calmly at the podium, as if an entire battle fleet pointing guns at her was just a minor inconvenience. Admiral Krevthar's face appeared on every screen in the chamber. His scales were deep crimson, marking him as high nobility. When he spoke, his voice dripped with authority. Captain Rodriguez, your terrorist action ends now. Release the delegates immediately. Surrender your forces. You have one standard cycle to comply, or we will board the station with military force. Maria looked up at his image and laughed. It wasn't a nervous laugh. It was genuine amusement. Admiral, you're right on time. We expected your fleet 47 minutes ago. Traffic delays? Krevathar's eyes narrowed. You think this is a game, human? You hold the Galactic Assembly hostage. You threaten the peace of the entire galaxy. Surrender now, and perhaps your death will be quick. You talk about peace, Maria said, her voice turning cold. Tell me, Admiral, where was this concern for peace when you ordered the attack on New Terra? The chamber erupted in shocked murmurs. Krevthar's face showed surprise for just a moment before returning to its mask of authority. Ridiculous accusation. I ordered no such thing. Maria tapped her datapad. On the screens. Krevathar's face was replaced by a communication log, time-stamped, encrypted with Valorian military codes. Authorization code 77 Alpha. Maria read aloud. Target: New Terra civilian zones. Objective: demonstrate consequences of human expansion into contested space. Acceptable casualties: all. Signed by Admiral Krefthar, Valorian Defense Fleet. The silence in the chamber was absolute. Even the Valorian delegates looked shocked. Fabricated, Krefthar snarled. Obvious forgery. Then let's verify it, Maria said. She gestured to one of her people who stepped forward with technical equipment. This is Dr. James Park, former cryptography specialist. He'll explain how we can confirm the authentication codes. A small alien from the Nyx species stood up. They were known galaxy-wide as the best code breakers and security experts. I am Specialist Trilix. I volunteer to verify these claims. If the codes are false, I will expose the forgery. If they are real, a small being looked at Krefthar's image. Then we have much to discuss. Maria nodded. Broadcast it all. Every verification step. Let the entire galaxy watch. Around the chamber, other delegates began to stand. A representative from the Kethron Confederation, a species that looked like large insectoids, clicked their mandibles. If we are bearing witness to truth, the Kethron said, then I too have testimony. For years, Valorian forces have conducted similar attacks on our border colonies. Each time, the Assembly called it an accident. Each time, evidence disappeared. Each time, we were told to accept it or face economic sanctions. A crystalline being from the Luminar Collective chimed in, their voice like ringing bells. Our trading vessels have been destroyed in Valorian space. 34 ships over 5 years, all called pirates or system malfunctions. All investigations blocked, more voices joined. Species after species, standing to speak about injustices they had suffered. Cover-ups, bribed votes. Evidence that disappeared. For years they had stayed silent because speaking up meant facing Valorian economic and military pressure. But now, with the entire galaxy watching a live broadcast, with humans who had nothing left to lose standing guard, they found their courage. Lord Dexerone tried to shout them down. This is chaos. Mob rule. The Assembly has procedures. Your procedures are a joke, a voice called out. Ambassador Sarah Chen stood up, surprising herself with her own boldness. I followed every procedure. I presented irrefutable evidence. And you buried it because it was convenient, because it was profitable. She looked around the chamber at her fellow delegates. These humans didn't storm the Assembly because they are violent. They stormed it because we left them no choice. We showed them that justice is only available to those with money and power. So they took power the only way they could. Maria watched Sarah with an expression that might have been gratitude. Then she turned back to the chamber. Here's what happens next, Maria said. Dr. Park and Specialist Trilix will verify every piece of evidence. It will be broadcast live, with no editing. When they're done, this Assembly will vote. Not on whether to investigate. Not on whether to form a committee. You will vote on guilt. Impossible, Dexorin hissed. The Assembly cannot. The Assembly can do whatever we force it to do, Maria interrupted. That's the lesson here. You've been playing games with procedure and protocol, hiding behind rules you wrote to protect yourselves. But rules only matter if people believe in them. And right now, 4 billion species across this galaxy are watching. They're seeing what happens when the powerful think they're untouchable. She pulled up another file on the screens. We have evidence of corruption involving 347 Assembly delegates, bribery, blackmail, vote manipulation. We don't care about most of it. We only care about one thing, justice for New Terra. Maria's voice dropped lower, more dangerous. Give us a real trial with real consequences, or we burn down the entire facade. Every dirty secret, every corrupt deal, every covered-up crime, the choice is yours, but choose fast. Because Admiral Krefthar out there is getting nervous, and we both know what nervous Valorians do. As if responding to her words, the station shook. A warning shot from the Valorian fleet, close enough to rattle the structure, but not damage it. Time's up, terrorists, Krefthar's voice boomed. I'm bringing my forces aboard. Anyone who resists will be his voice cut off suddenly. The screens flickered and switched to show the space around the station. But now it wasn't just Valorian ships out there. A massive fleet had arrived. Ships from the Kethron Confederation. Vessels from smaller species that had suffered under Valorian dominance. Even some independent human colony ships, armed and ready. A new voice came through the communication systems. Admiral Krefthar, this is Fleet Commander Zixrol of the Kethron Confederation. We are here to ensure a fair trial proceeds. Any attempt to interfere will be met with defensive action. You dare threaten the Valorian Empire? Krefthar roared. You dare demand justice, Zixral replied calmly. Something we should have done years ago. The galaxy is watching, Admiral. Make your choice carefully. Inside the chamber, the dynamic had completely shifted. The Valorian delegates sat in stunned silence. Other species were organizing, talking amongst themselves, finding unity in shared grievances. Maria looked at the eternal speaker, the ancient being that led the Assembly Council. Well, do we have our trial? The eternal speaker's tentacles writhed slowly, a sign of deep thought in their species. For centuries they had maintained order through careful balance and compromise. But they could read the room. They could see that the old way was dying. The trial will proceed, the eternal speaker announced. Evidence will be presented. All claims will be verified. The Assembly will vote on findings of fact, not merely on procedure. Maria nodded. Broadcast everything. No delays, no editing. The galaxy watches. Over the next several hours, the trial unfolded. Dr. Park and Specialist Trilix verified the authentication codes on the orders. They were genuine. Admiral Krefthar had indeed authorized the attack on New Terra. More evidence followed. Financial records showing Valorian payments to Assembly delegates. Communication logs of threats and bribes. Sensor data from a dozen different attacks on civilian targets across multiple species. A Valorian engineer, trembling with fear, stepped forward to testify. He described how he had been ordered to disguise military weapons to look like reactor malfunctions. He had refused at first, but they threatened his family. He had done it because he had no choice. Lord Dexerone tried to discredit witnesses. He claimed the evidence was manipulated. But every challenge was met with more proof, more verification, more testimony. The galaxy watched it all. Billions of beings across hundreds of worlds saw the Valorian Empire's facade crack and crumble. They saw the Assembly's corruption exposed. They saw what happened when the powerful thought they were above justice. As the evidence mounted, something changed in the chamber. Delegates who had been quiet found their voices. Species that had accepted injustice as normal began to demand better. The Assembly was transforming before their eyes, forced to become what it had always claimed to be. Finally, after 8 hours of testimony and verification, the Eternal Speaker called for a vote. The Assembly will now vote on the following findings: that the Valorian Empire deliberately attacked New Terra, that Admiral Krefthar authorized this attack, that Assembly procedures were corrupted to hide this crime. All in favor of these findings? The vote was counted. Sarah Chen watched the numbers climb on her screen. It wasn't unanimous. The Valorian delegates and their closest allies voted against. Some species abstained, still afraid of consequences, but when the final count appeared, it was clear: 803 votes in favor, 217 votes against. Justice finally had won. End of Part 3 #. The Galactic watched in horror as humans stormed the Galactic Central Assembly ##. Part 4. The price of justice. The vote results hung on the screens like a judgment from the heavens. 803 votes confirming Valorian guilt. The chamber erupted in noise. Some delegates cheered. Others argued. The Valorian section sat in furious silence. Admiral Krefthar's face reappeared on the communication screens. His crimson scales seemed darker now, almost black with rage. The Valorian Empire does not recognize this illegal proceeding, he declared. These findings are the result of terrorism and coercion. We will not submit to them. Maria Rodriguez still stood at the podium, watching him with calm eyes. That's your choice, Admiral. But the galaxy has seen the evidence. They've heard the testimony. You can deny it all you want, but truth doesn't need your permission to exist. Truth. Krefthar laughed bitterly. You speak of truth while holding the Assembly hostage, while threatening to destroy centuries of galactic order? You are terrorists, nothing more. We're survivors, Maria corrected him. And we're done waiting for people like you to grant us justice. The Admiral's eyes narrowed. Then you leave me no choice. My fleet will board that station. We will rescue the delegates, and you will face Valorian justice. Fire one shot at this station, Maria said quietly, and everything goes public. Every secret file, every covered-up crime, every piece of corruption we've found in the Valorian Empire's networks. And yes, Admiral, we've been in your systems too. A new window appeared on the screens. Classified Valorian military documents. Intelligence reports. Evidence of dozens of covert operations against other species. Plans for future attacks. Economic manipulation schemes. The chamber went silent as delegates read what was displayed. Sarah Chen felt her blood run cold. If even half of what she was seeing was true, the Valorian Empire had been playing a much darker game than anyone suspected. You're bluffing, Krevthar said, but his voice had lost some of its certainty. Try me, Maria replied. My family is dead. My home is ash. I have nothing left to lose but you. You have an empire built on fear and lies. What happens when everyone sees what you really are? For a long moment, nobody moved. The Valorian fleet held position. Inside the chamber, delegates waited to see what would happen. Then a new voice entered the conversation. It came from the Kethran fleet surrounding the station. Admiral Krevthar, this is Commander Zixrel. I have a proposal. The Assembly has found the Valorian Empire guilty. Proper procedure would be to issue sanctions and demand reparations. If you accept this judgment peacefully, the classified information remains sealed. If you attack, the Kethran Confederation will support its full release, and we will defend this station with our lives. Other fleet commanders chimed in. Species that had remained neutral before were now taking sides. The balance of power was shifting. Krefthar's face twisted with rage. You would all choose these terrorists over the empire that has maintained galactic order for 300 years? You call it order, Zixor replied. We call it oppression. The galaxy is tired of your version of peace. The Valorian admiral closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them again, Sarah could see the calculation in them. He was weighing his options. Attack and start a war the Valorian Empire might not win. Retreat and look weak. Or the Valorian Empire will withdraw from the assembly station, Krevthar finally said. But know this, Captain Rodriguez. Know this, Commander Zixrel. Know this, all of you who participated in this farce. The Valorian Empire does not forget. We do not forgive. One day, you will all pay for this insult. His image disappeared. On the external screens, the Valorian fleet began to pull back. Slowly, reluctantly. But they were leaving. A cheer went up in the chamber. But Maria didn't join in. She knew what Krevthar's words meant. This wasn't over. It was just beginning. The Eternal Speaker raised its tentacles for silence. The Assembly must now determine appropriate sanctions and reparations. What followed was hours of debate. The final judgment was harsh but measured. The Valorian Empire would pay reparations to the families of New Terra. 3 Valorian officials, including Admiral Krevthar, would be tried in absentia for war crimes. Trade restrictions would be imposed until the Valorian government implemented oversight reforms. It wasn't everything Maria had wanted, but it was more than the victims of New Terra had ever hoped to receive. As the judgment was read, Sarah noticed security forces beginning to surround the human raiders. Commander Zilmoth stepped forward, his expression apologetic but firm. Captain Rodriguez, he said, I must now inform you that you and your people are under arrest. Charges include illegal entry, assault, hostage-taking, and terrorism. Adria nodded slowly. She had known this was coming. I understand, no. Someone shouted. Sarah looked up to see delegates from several species standing. It was the Kethran representative who had spoken. These humans gave us courage to demand justice. They exposed corruption that threatened us all. They should be honored, not arrested. They broke the law, Zilmouth replied. Regardless of their motives, their actions cannot be ignored. Sarah found herself standing. Her mouth moved before her brain could catch up. Then I demand the right to defend them. As ambassador of Earth, I claim diplomatic immunity on their behalf and request a fair trial. Other ambassadors stood as well. The Cathron Confederation supports this request. The Luminar Collective agrees. The Nix Assembly stands with Captain Rodriguez. One by one, species that had found their voice during the trial now used it to defend the humans who had started it all. The Eternal Speaker looked around the chamber, reading the mood. Captain Rodriguez and her people will receive a trial, the speaker announced. But they must submit to detention until that time. All in favor? This vote was even more decisive. Only the Valorian delegates and a few of their closest allies voted against. Maria looked at Sarah and smiled. It was a tired smile, but genuine. "Thank you, Ambassador." "You shouldn't thank me yet," Sarah said quietly. "You still face serious charges." "I know," Maria replied, "but we got what we came for. Justice for New Terra, that's worth whatever comes next." As security forces led the human raiders away, the chamber slowly began to empty. Delegates returned to their ships, eager to report what they had witnessed. The galaxy had changed today, and everyone knew it. Sarah stayed behind, watching the screens that still showed the Valorian fleet retreating. They were leaving, yes. But Krevthar's final words echoed in her mind. This wasn't over. 6 months later, the galaxy looked very different. The Valorian Empire had withdrawn from several border regions. Unable to maintain control without assembly support, internal protests had erupted on multiple Valorian worlds, with citizens demanding accountability from their government. 3 high-ranking officials, including Admiral Krevthar, had been arrested by their own people to avoid harsher assembly sanctions. The assembly itself had been restructured. New oversight committees had been formed. Voting procedures had been reformed. It wasn't perfect, but it was better. And Captain Maria Rodriguez stood in a courtroom, facing her judgment. The trial had taken months. The prosecution argued terrorism and chaos. The defense argued necessity and prevention of greater harm. Witnesses testified on both sides. The galaxy watched, just as they had watched the assembly raid. Ambassador Sarah Chen took the stand on the final day. She was nervous, but she knew what she had to say. Captain Rodriguez broke laws, Sarah testified. But those laws were protecting a system that had broken its most fundamental promise, justice for all. Without her actions, millions more might have died in future attacks. The galaxy would have continued accepting that the powerful can murder with impunity.
Oh.
The prosecutor challenged her. "Are you saying that anyone who feels wronged can storm the assembly? That any injustice justifies terrorism?" Sarah paused, choosing her words carefully. "I'm saying that when legal systems become tools of oppression rather than justice, people have a right to demand change. Captain Rodriguez didn't kill anyone. She didn't destroy anything that couldn't be repaired. She forced a corrupt system to look at itself in the mirror. That's not terrorism. That's revolution." The judges deliberated for 3 days. When they returned, the lead judge spoke in a solemn voice. "We find Captain Rodriguez and her co-defendants guilty of illegal entry, unlawful detention, and interference with assembly operations." Maria stood straight, ready to accept whatever punishment came. However, the judge continued, "We recognize the extraordinary circumstances and the positive outcomes that resulted from these actions. We sentence the defendants to time already served during this trial, plus 1,000 hours of community service working with the newly formed Galactic Justice Commission. This commission will investigate past injustices and reform assembly procedures. Who better to guide these reforms than those who expose the need for them?" The courtroom erupted in noise. Some shouted in anger. Others cheered. Maria just stood there, looking stunned. "You're free," Sarah told her, feeling tears in her eyes. "You're actually free." Maria looked at her hands as if she couldn't believe they weren't going to be bound. "We did it," she whispered. "We actually did it." Sarah saw something in Maria's eyes that worried her. Relief, yes, but also emptiness. Maria had spent 6 months fighting for justice. Now that she had it, what was left? As they left the courtroom, reporters from 100 species swarmed them. Questions flew from every direction. Maria answered a few, then simply walked away, needing space. Sarah followed her to a quiet observation deck overlooking the assembly station. They stood in silence for a while, watching ships come and go. "What will you do now?" Sarah finally asked. Maria was quiet for a long moment. "I don't know. I spent so long focused on making them pay, on forcing justice. Now that it's done, ... Double quotes. She trailed off. "Now you have to figure out how to live again," Sarah finished gently. "How to be more than just a survivor. How to be human." Maria nodded slowly. "Yeah, I guess I do." They stood together, two humans who had changed the galaxy, wondering what came next. Behind them, the assembly continued its work. A better assembly now. A more just one. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start, and sometimes a start was enough. End of Part 4. The Galactic watched in horror as humans stormed the Galactic Central Assembly. Part 5. The New Order. 6 months had passed since the trial. The galaxy was still adjusting to its new reality. Captain Maria Rodriguez sat in a small office on the assembly station, reviewing reports from across known space. Her title now was Special Consultant to the Galactic Justice Commission. It sounded official and boring, but the work itself was anything but. On her desk sat datapads from 17 different species. Each one contained a story of injustice, covered-up crimes, bribed officials, legal systems twisted to protect the powerful. The kind of stories that had once been buried and forgotten now. They were being investigated. A soft chime indicated someone at her door. "Come in, Maria," called Ambassador Sarah. Chen entered, carrying 2 cups of something that looked like coffee but smelled like flowers. "Thought you could use a break." Maria accepted the cup gratefully. Over the past months, she and Sarah had become something like friends. It was strange. Before New Terra, Maria had been a transport pilot with a normal life. Now she worked alongside diplomats and changed galactic policy. "How many new cases today?" Sarah asked. 23, Maria replied. "And those are just the ones with enough evidence to investigate. There are hundreds more still being verified." Sarah sat down with a sigh. The Assembly created the Justice Commission to reform itself. I don't think they realized how much corruption they were actually hiding. "They knew," Maria said quietly. "They just didn't care. As long as it was profitable and kept them in power, they were happy to ignore it." On Maria's screen, a report from the Kethran Confederation detailed 3 decades of forced trade agreements. The Valorian Empire had threatened military action, unless the Ketrons sold resources at far below market value. When they refused, Valorian ships destroyed mining facilities and blamed it on equipment failures. Another report, one from a species called the Prill. Their colony ships had been disappearing for years. The Assembly had called it navigation errors. The truth was that Valorian raiders had been capturing them, selling the populations as labor to mining operations in deep space. The list went on and on. "Sometimes I wonder if we made things worse," Maria admitted. "We opened this box, and now everyone sees how rotten things really were. Some species are calling for revolution. Others want to withdraw from the Assembly entirely. The Valorian Empire is still hostile and looking for any excuse to prove we were wrong." Sarah was quiet for a moment. "Do you regret it?" Maria thought about her family. Her husband's laugh. Her daughter's curiosity about everything. Her son's drawings that covered their refrigerator. All gone. All taken by people who thought they were untouchable. "No," she said finally. "Better to tear down something broken and build it right than to keep pretending the cracks don't exist." A communication alert interrupted them. Maria accepted it, and a holographic projection appeared. It was Specialist Trilix, the small Nix, who had helped verify evidence during the trial. "Captain Rodriguez," Ambassador Chen Trilix said, "we have a situation. Representatives from the Mylar Union have arrived. They wish to meet with you specifically." Maria exchanged a glance with Sarah. The Mylar Union was a group of smaller species that had formed their own alliance after the trial. They had been watching the Justice Commission's work carefully. "Send them in," Maria said. A few minutes later, 3 Mylar representatives entered the office. They were different species, but all small, all from worlds that had little military power or economic influence. The kind of species that the old assembly had mostly ignored, their leader. A being that looked like a floating jellyfish, spoke in musical tones. "Captain Rodriguez, we come seeking advice." "I'm not sure I'm qualified to give advice," Maria said honestly. "I'm still figuring this out myself." "That is exactly why we need your wisdom," the jellyfish replied. "For generations, our people have suffered injustices. Small ones, perhaps, compared to New Terra, but constant. Ships taxed unfairly. Trade routes denied to us. Our voices ignored in assembly votes." Another representative, this one covered in crystalline fur, continued. "We have watched your work with the Justice Commission. We have seen reforms begin, but we fear it is not enough. The powerful species still control too much. They simply hide it better now. What are you asking?" Sarah asked carefully. The third representative, a creature made of swirling gases, spoke. "We want to know how you did it. How you made them listen. How you forced change when every legal method had failed." Maria felt her chest tighten. She knew where this was going, and she didn't like it. "You want to know how to storm an assembly?" she said flatly. "We want to know how to demand justice when justice is denied," the jellyfish corrected. "You showed the galaxy that the weak can challenge the strong, that the powerless can force change. We need to learn from you." Maria stood and walked to the window. Outside, she could see the repaired sections of the station. The places her team had breached were now stronger than before. Everything looked peaceful. But she knew better. "What we did," Maria said slowly, "was dangerous. We could have started a war. We could have died. Hell, we probably should have died. We survived because we got lucky and because species like the Ketrons backed us up." She turned to face the Mylar representatives. "If you do what we did, there's no guarantee it will work. You might just become martyrs. Your people might suffer even more. And if we do nothing," the gas creature asked, "what then? Do we simply accept injustice forever?" Sarah stood up beside Maria. "There are other ways to create change. Legal methods, political pressure, building alliances which take decades, the crystalline being interrupted, centuries even. How many generations must suffer while we wait for the powerful to voluntarily give up their advantages?" Maria closed her eyes. She understood their frustration. She had felt it herself, standing in the ashes of her home, knowing that the beings who killed her family would never face consequences. "Can't tell you what to do," Maria said finally, "but I can tell you what I learned. Change doesn't come from violence. It comes from making injustice visible. We didn't storm the assembly to hurt anyone. We stormed it to force everyone to look at the truth they were ignoring." She pulled up files on her computer. "The Justice Commission has documented everything we found. Every corrupt vote, every covered-up crime, every injustice we uncovered. It's all public now. That's your weapon, not guns, not ships. Truth. But truth without power is just words," the jellyfish said sadly. "Then find power in numbers," Sarah suggested. "The Mylar Union represents 43 species. That's millions of voices. Use them. Organize. Protest. Make it impossible for the assembly to ignore you. Be loud. Be persistent. Be everywhere. And if that doesn't work?" the gas creature asked. Maria met their gaze steadily. "Then you'll have to decide what you're willing to risk, what you're willing to sacrifice. Because real change always costs something." The Mylar representatives left thoughtfully. After they were gone, Sarah looked at Maria with concern. "Are we creating a revolution?" Sarah asked quietly. "We already created one," Maria replied. "The day we stormed the station, we showed every oppressed species in the galaxy that the powerful aren't invincible. Now we just have to make sure the revolution doesn't eat itself." Over the following weeks, the Mylar Union did exactly what Maria and Sarah had suggested. They organized massive protests on assembly member worlds. They boycotted companies that supported corrupt officials. They created their own news network, broadcasting stories of injustice that the mainstream media ignored. They didn't storm anything. They didn't threaten violence. They just refused to be silent anymore. And it worked. Slowly, painfully, but it worked. The Assembly passed new regulations protecting smaller species. Trade laws were reformed. Representation was rebalanced to give more voice to those who had been ignored. Not everyone was happy with the changes. The Valorian Empire remained hostile, though they had withdrawn from open aggression. Some of the older, more established species grumbled about losing their advantages, but the tide had shifted. Justice was becoming more than just a word the powerful used to maintain control. Maria continued her work with the Justice Commission, investigating cases and helping species navigate the new system. It wasn't the life she had planned. She would have given anything to have her family back, to be a simple transport pilot again. But she had found a new purpose. In helping others demand justice, she honored the memory of those she had lost. One day, almost a year after the raid, Maria received an unusual visitor. It was a young Valorian, barely an adult by their species standards. They approached her office nervously, their scales pale with anxiety. Captain Rodriguez. They asked hesitantly. "Just Maria is fine," she said gently. "What can I do for you?" The young Valorian took a deep breath. "My name is Cress. My father was one of the officers involved in the New Terra attack. He's in prison now because of what you did." Maria felt her body tense. "I see. I came to tell you something," Cress continued, their voice shaking. "For my whole life, I was taught that the Valorian Empire was glorious, that we brought order to chaos, that other species needed our guidance." They paused, tears forming in their large eyes. "I never questioned it. Nobody did. Until you," Cress Maria started, but the young Valorian interrupted. "You showed the galaxy what my people really are, what we've done, and it destroyed everything I believed in." Cress looked up, meeting Maria's eyes directly. "I spent months hating you, blaming you for ruining my life, for taking my father away." Maria waited, not sure where this was going. "But then I learned the truth," Cress said. "I read the reports. I saw the evidence. My father helped murder 2.3 million people. And I did nothing because I didn't want to see it." Tears ran down their scaled face. "So I came here to say, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for what my people did to yours. And to thank you for forcing us to look in the mirror." Maria felt her own eyes getting wet. She had spent so long angry, so focused on forcing the guilty to pay, she hadn't thought much about the innocent people caught in the middle. People like Cress, who had to live with the shame of what their leaders had done. "It's not your fault," Maria said gently. "You can't control what your father chose to do, but I can control what I choose," Cress replied. "I'm joining the Justice Commission. If you'll have me, I want to help prevent this from ever happening again." Maria stood and walked around her desk. She extended her hand to the young Valorian. "Welcome to the team, Cress. We need people like you. People brave enough to admit when their side was wrong." They shook hands, a human and a Valorian, working together to build something better. Sarah witnessed the exchange from the doorway and smiled. This was what real change looked like. Not just new laws and policies, but new understanding. New connections between species that had been enemies. The galaxy was still far from perfect. Injustices still occurred. Power still corrupted. The Valorian Empire was still hostile, and other species still struggled with prejudice and inequality. But now, at least there was hope. There was a system that could be challenged. There were voices that couldn't be silenced. There were humans like Maria who refused to accept that might makes right in offices across the galaxy. Beings from hundreds of species were doing similar work, investigating corruption, demanding accountability, teaching others what they had learned from humanity's example, that sometimes the only way to storm the gates of power was to refuse to wait for permission to enter, that justice delayed. Indefinitely was justice denied. That the galaxy's most dangerous force wasn't technology or military might, but people who had nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. Maria stood at the window of her office, looking out at the assembly station, the place she had stormed with nothing but grief and determination. the place that had become her second home. Her family was gone. Her old life was gone. But in their memory, she had helped change an entire galaxy. Sometimes, she thought that was enough. The stars shone outside. Billions of them, each representing worlds where beings were learning that they didn't have to accept injustice, that they could demand better, that they could fight back.